Hi, this is TD here today with a review of Omen Edge of the Aegean, which is the latest game by Smallbox Games and John Clowdus in the Omen universe. It's a two-player card game that is very similar to Magic the Gathering with its card combos. So I've always looked for my holy grail of Magic-like games. I used to be huge into the Magic scene. Unfortunately, decided at a certain point that the money sink of that game and the time in building decks was just not worth it. And I've got to admit that this game, or at least Omen: A Reign of War for that matter, was the replacement for me. And you'll always see on the recommendations of Board Game Geek, hey, what's like Magic? And if anybody asks that question, I think that this is the perfect game for them. But before we give too much of the review away, let's mention a few other things. That this game is not Omen: A Reign of War. It's more of a micro version of Omen: A Reign of War, and we may also do a comparison video, so stay tuned for that if you're interested in it. Also, this has got the amount of cards that a micro game might have. There are 22 cards in the main deck over there on the left, but it packs a heck of a lot of punch that makes you think that it's a lot more of a game than just that. And the final thing worth mentioning here in the intro section is that this game is like a vicious UFC fight where you just throw giant haymakers into one opposing player's face and then they throw a giant haymaker right back into yours. So if you're a fan of brutal two-player card games, then this one might be something worth checking out. So let's dive right into the review. There are a few things worth mentioning before we dive too deep into the review. The first of which is that I have played this game 10 times, and I feel like that's given me a very good understanding of how the game plays through, especially considering the fact that I've played Omen: A Reign of War, which this game harkens back to very heavily, over 100 times this year alone. So again, I've played the game 10 times. I'm a huge fan of Omen: A Reign of War. It's easily my most played game. Not only that, but it's my favorite game of all time. The other things worth mentioning are that I have not incorporated the cards from Omen Edge of the Aegean into Omen: A Reign of War, as I had to create this as a print and play game, which is one of the other things that I should mention. The content that you see in front of you are actually cards that I just printed out on a home printer, then laminated. The coins below are actually from Omen: A Reign of War there on the right, but they are very similar to the Kickstarter edition. And so anyways, from a cosmetic perspective of things, while it still looks very good, it will not quite be as good as the final copy of the game. And if you are looking for a rules overview or a gameplay example, which you would normally find in either my review or really most other reviewers' videos, please see the description below for a link, because I've got a dedicated rules overview with a gameplay example that I think would be a heck of a lot better than just doing a quick overview in this video. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's take a dive straight into the gameplay, what I like, don't like about it. And the first thing that's worth mentioning is that each card in this game, and even though there are only 22 main cards in the deck, all of them are unique. What that leads to is a couple things. The first of which is that there's going to be a steep learning curve at the very beginning when you start playing this game, because you're going to have to read the card text of each and every card. A lot of cards will allow you to draw more cards, discard other cards, and so you really have to pay attention to what cards you want and don't want for those first few games. That said, there's the flip side of that, which is to say that for a 22 card deck, since each card is unique, it really feels like there are a heck of a lot more cards in the deck than just that. And compared to other micro games, I would say that this one has got a ton of longevity, and it feels like a full-fledged game, even though it has so few cards. I also love the fact that, unlike Omen: A Reign of War, when these cities become war-torn and you're going to gain rewards, if a city is ever depleted of all the rewards that it have, the units within that city are going to be discarded. You can no longer play within this city. Instead, you can only play at the other two cities. And again, when one of those gets depleted, then you can only play at one final city. What it leads to is two things. Number one is it's kind of thematic in the sense that the cities are, being war-torn, they're crumbling, they're being torn down by all of these units battling within them. So you naturally have to go from one city to the next, and you can't even fight in there anymore because it's just a pile of rubble. So it's very thematic in that sense. And it also leads to the end game a little bit quicker because it forces you to funnel your troops into the only available cities that are out on the map. And I actually really like that. I also am thoroughly enjoying the way that key res cards have changed the game. So the first thing that I really enjoy about them is the fact that they've actually streamlined the rules a little bit.
They've effectively eliminated both the portent step and the feat step from this game, which reduces the amount of steps overall during your turn by 2. If you notice here, each one of these cards has got at the end of your surge step ability that says either draw a card or gain a coin. This effectively makes them oracles, but not only are they oracles from Omen Reign of War, but they also have an exalt ability down at the very bottom, which is what I like about them the most. It essentially says that if you meet a certain condition, you can flip these cards face down, you exalt them into your reward pile, and then they're worth 2 victory points. Now, the reason why I like that is because instead of being static feats from Omen Reign of War, instead you actually have to play these units onto the battlefield. And the reason why that's important is because you can react not only to the key res cards that you've put out on the battlefield, but you can react to what your opponent has done. If you notice he's got, let's say, 3 key res cards out on the battlefield, or he's about to accomplish some of them, you could actually try to remove them from the battlefield by killing them off, thus disabling him from getting those victory points. And I think it gives you something extra to think about on your turn rather than just having static feats.
I also really enjoy the Mirai cards. I enjoy them because at the very end of the game, each one of these is going to be worth 1 victory point if they're in your hands. Now, the reason why that's important is because towards the end of the game, you're going to have a lot of cards that are removed from the deck. For example, cards will be in cities, you may have a ton of cards in the discard pile, you may also have a bunch of exalted key res cards that have been removed from the game as they go into your victory point piles. So that leaves you with just a thin deck of cards, and these Mirai cards become very valuable at the very end because you can sneak a few of these into your hand. You may only be down by 1 point at the end of the game, and then all of a sudden reveal that you have 2 or maybe even all 3 Mirai cards in your hand, and they're each worth 1 victory point, which all of a sudden gave you the edge and ultimately led to your victory. So it's an interesting way to play out the end of the game, and they're also valuable during the middle of the game because they all have an ongoing effect. Not only do they have an ongoing effect, but if you notice in the top right-hand corner, they also have a tremendous amount of offering value. So it doesn't matter if it's the beginning, middle, or end of the game, these are always valuable cards. While I love the other 2 unit types, I gotta admit that Myrmidons are where it's at. This is for a couple reasons. The first of which is they're most common in the deck, and the second of which is they're easily the most powerful in the deck. And that's because each Myrmidon has got a special effect that says when this unit or any other unit enters the city on your side, you may pay X, which in this case is discard a unit, and if you do, you're going to gain a special effect. What that leads to are overpowered combinations where you can play one card which triggers another card, which triggers another card, and next thing you know, you have just got a wealth of special effects coming out the wazoo. I'll also say that a couple of these cards out there, these 2 in specific, are tremendously powerful. I would consider them like generals or champions or heroes of the battlefield. And they're a blessing and a curse because you will find that your strategy becomes a little narrow-sighted in the sense that you want these cards because they can make that big of an impact out on the battlefield. So you're going to constantly try to either draw them or to get them out of the discard pile, or if you find that your opponent has them, you're going to want to use some of the cards that have unit removal effects. So you're always focusing on a few of the really overpowered Myrmidons. Now, that can be interesting because it really changes the way that you play the game in the sense that you have to focus on certain units or gaining other units that make you take out those units. So, I got to mention again 2 things about these cards. Number 1 is that you can really get creative with how you combo all of their effects because they can chain react. And number 2 is you might want to take into consideration the fact that some of these are tremendously powerful and build a strategy around them. The last unit type is the Otamatons, and I gotta admit that these are my absolute favorite, and mainly because the artwork is just so amazing on them, but also because they can really help out in a time of war. They all have a lot of attack value for the money that you pay. They're worth 2 units in a city, which can help you make things automatically war-torn. And most importantly is they all have a special ability that when you offer them, not only are you going to get a coin or a card for their offering value, but you also trigger a special effect. And these 2 guys over here, one that makes you move all units of the chosen type from each city to the discard pile, and the other one that makes you gain a coin, draw a card, and the opposing player lose a coin and lose a card, are really, really powerful and absolutely love them. I talked about in the last minute how some of those Myrmidons are really powerful, and this Blistering Bull here is a great example of how you can just offer this, call Myrmidon, and then remove all Myrmidons from all cities to the discard pile. It's a great way to rebuke that strategy, and that's why I love some of these Otamatons so much. The final thing I want to talk about from a gameplay perspective are the rewards cards. Each of these, like the unit cards, are all unique. And 5 out of the 6 of them, I think, are tremendously well balanced. A few of them are very unique and interesting. For example, this one says you can discard a card from your hand as an offering, which means you get an offering in the middle of your surge step. Then you can choose a unit card in the discard pile and move it to your hand, which again is a great way to rebuke the strategy that I talked about with Myrmidons. If you find that your opponent has a great Myrmidon, you can kill it off first. As soon as it goes into the discard pile, you can play that reward and go fishing for it back. And then since you offered a card, you'll probably have enough coins to play it immediately out into the battlefield. There is one card that says to remove all units from a single city. I gotta admit that that card is a bit too situational from my personal preferences. It is, again, a unit removal card, which can help you get rid of some of the more powerful cards. But unfortunately, you end up saving it for when your opponent has just got a ton of units in the city, and that just doesn't happen that frequently. So normally you only use it to remove 1, maybe 2 units, and I think I would prefer if its text said you can remove 2 units from any cities, and I think that would make that one a little more valuable. The last card that I want to take notice to is this reward up here that simply says, until your next turn, a specific city cannot become war-torn, and your opposing player cannot play units to that city. This is an awesome way to just do a stalemate at the very end of the game. If you want to have the last turn of the game, there's only 1 reward left in 1 city. You can play that card, then your opponent can't do anything in that city, and then ultimately it leads to you having the last turn of the game. It's highly situational again, but I'll tell you what, it can really change the course of the battle. And that's it from a gameplay perspective, but there's a lot more to talk about with this game, and I think one of the main things that we're going to want to look at is how good some of the artwork looks in this game. I've picked out 6 of my favorites here. The automatons and myrmidons all look exceptional, and it's got this watercolor type painting look to it that I think is just very unique and interesting. Now, I will admit that Omen Reign of War has really set the bar high as far as artwork is concerned, but a lot of these cards just look exceptional, and I want to take a handful of seconds to really just pay some honorable mention to all of these cards in front of us. While the vast majority of the cards look exceptional as seen in the previous clip, there is a small nitpick that I wanted to bring attention to, and that are the Keyrez cards and the Mirai cards. And it's as simple as this, that the artwork, especially the backgrounds being the exact same color, makes them look fairly similar to one another. So when your opponent plays one of these to a battlefield, it's going to be upside down from your perspective, and it's kind of tough to tell, oh, this Keyrez card does this, whereas that one does that. And I'll tell you, in Omen Reign of War, I was able to immediately identify, just based off of what the picture was, what that card did as I quickly memorized the cards. In this, the pictures are just a little too similar to one another, especially with the backgrounds being the exact same color, for me to easily identify which Keyrez and which Mirai card is which. So now that we've taken a good look at all of the different things within this game, what do I actually think of it? I've got to admit, Omen Edge of the Aegean has made me a huge fan. Of course, I'm biased. I love Omen Reign of War. This game gives you every bit of that Omen Reign of War feel in a much more confined and streamlined game. I love the fact that it's quicker because as those cities are depleted, you have to focus your efforts in the other cities, which then makes the game go by even faster. I love the fact that the Keyrez cards and the Mirai cards, for example, have streamlined some of the steps so that you no longer have a feat or a portent step. It just makes it that much easier to teach the game. And I think that with the Myrmidons, the Automatons, and some of the other cards, if you are a Magic the Gathering player, or if you like card comboing games, Ashes might be another example, Codex, Yomi, there are a whole bunch of games in this genre. This game is going to be right up your alley. And even though it does have a steep learning curve, because you're going to have to read each one of the card texts, after probably your first 2 or 3 games, and each game only takes maybe 15 to 30 minutes, 30 minutes being one of the starting games, 15 minutes being, the games once you've got to know the things, you'll know every single card in the game and they will fly by. Those combos can chain react and really give you some interesting and creative options to your victory path. And the artwork, it's exceptional. I love it. There are a handful of cards that I have a difficult time distinguishing one over the other. It's a small nitpick to pay for what in reality is a great looking game. So at the end of the day, this game is $15. You get a gold foil stamped box. You get all of the cards here in front of you. You get the coins. You get a full color rule book. I'm not trying to throw this in as an advertisement. I'm just saying micro games have really taken off because they're cheap. And that barrier to entry is easy to break. It's $15. And I think that especially for this game, it packs so much meat on its bones that is just an easy price to pay. And so anyways, definitely give it a shot, especially if you're a fan of Omen Reign of War. I think this will give you the feel that you're looking for. It'll give you actually something unique and a little bit different because there are no units that are the same in this game compared to that game. So overall, if I had to put a rating on this game, I would give it a solid 8.5 out of 10. That could fluctuate. As I mentioned, I've played the game 10 times. We've played Omen over 100 times. So I feel like I've got a good understanding. But again, it could fluctuate. It could go up, could go down. But for now, I think a solid 8.5 out of 10 is right for this game. If you have any questions, comments, please feel free to leave them below. And until next time, this is TD. You guys have a great day.